"Mom, why is Grandma saying I'm staying here?" My 9-year-old looked terrified. My sister had her emergency custody papers ready. My mom smiled and said, "Emma deserves better." I grabbed my daughter's hand to leave. That's when my brother blocked the door and said something that made me realize this wasn't just a family disagreement anymore. This was a calculated ambush. Let me back up 3 weeks, because that's when everything started unraveling, though I didn't see it then. I was standing in the marble foyer of our Buckhead home, the one Richard and I had spent 2 years renovating into something straight out of Architectural Digest. Emma was running late for her piano lesson at the conservatory, and I was juggling my phone, her sheet music, and a latte that cost more than most people's lunch. Richard texted saying he'd be home late again. Merger talks, always merger talks. And I remember thinking how normal everything felt, how stupidly, blissfully normal. Emma's teacher called that afternoon to say she never showed up. My stomach dropped. I'd watched her walk into the building myself, seen her blonde ponytail disappear through those heavy oak doors. I called the school. They said she'd been signed out early by her grandmother, my mother. I hadn't spoken to my mother in almost 6 months, not since she'd made those comments about my marriage at Thanksgiving, about how Richard was too consumed with work and how Emma was suffering from maternal neglect because I'd gone back to finish my MBA. The same MBA that was supposed to prove I was more than just Richard Holloway's wife. I drove to my mother's estate in Ansley Park, doing 90 on Peachtree, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel. The gates were open when I arrived, like she'd been expecting me, like this was all part of some twisted plan. What I found inside would shatter everything I thought I knew about my own family. But the worst part? I'd been too blind to see the signs. My mother was in the sunroom, the one overlooking her prize-winning rose garden, sipping tea like this was a social call. Emma was upstairs, she said, safe, comfortable. I demanded to see my daughter immediately, but my mother just gestured to the chair across from her with that same pleasant smile she'd worn at 1,000 charity galas. "Sit down, Norma. We need to talk about Emma's welfare." That's when my sister walked in, Diane. We'd barely been close growing up. She was 8 years older, had always been the responsible one, the one who stayed close to home while I ran off to marry Richard after college. She was carrying a folder, professional and detached, like she was presenting a case to a client, instead of talking about her own niece. "Norma, we've consulted with family attorneys," she said, her voice measured. "Given the circumstances, we believe Emma would be better served living here with Mother for a while." I actually laughed. It was such an absurd statement that laughter was the only response my brain could produce. "You've lost your mind, both of you. I'm taking my daughter and leaving." That's when Diane opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Me leaving the Ritz-Carlton downtown at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Me having lunch with someone at a corner table at Bacchanalia. Me in the parking garage of an office building in Midtown looking around before getting into a car that wasn't mine. The photos were grainy but unmistakable. She slid them across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. But here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, and it would change everything. "These prove nothing," I said, keeping my voice steady, even as my heart hammered. "You've been following me, having me followed? Do you understand how insane this is?" My mother finally spoke, her tone disappointed rather than angry. "We've watched you neglect that child for months, Norma, always running off to your classes, your study groups, your meetings. Richard works constantly. Emma spends more time with nannies than with her own parents. And now this." She gestured at the photos. "We're not blind." I stood up, rage replacing shock. "Emma is my daughter. Mine. You have no legal right." "Actually," Diane interrupted, pulling out more papers, "in Georgia, grandparents can petition for custody if they can prove the child's welfare is at risk. We have documentation of Emma's declining grades, her anxiety. Her teacher reported she's been having panic attacks in class. The school counselor has been trying to reach you for weeks." That hit me like a physical blow. Emma was struggling? Why hadn't she told me? Why hadn't I noticed? But I couldn't show weakness, not now. I'm calling Richard and our lawyer. My mother's smile widened. Of course, dear. I'm sure Richard will be very interested to hear about this conversation. Go get Emma. We'll see you soon. Something in her tone made my blood run cold, but I pushed past Diane and took the stairs 2 at a time. Emma was in the guest room, the one that used to be mine as a teenager, watching cartoons on an iPad. When she saw me, relief flooded her face. Mom, Grandma said we were going to have a sleepover, but I told her I had homework. I hugged her so tight she squeaked. We're going home, baby, right now. Driving back, I tried to process what had just happened. My own family staging an intervention like I was some kind of unfit mother. The photos were misleading. Every single one had an innocent explanation. But the timing, the precision of it all, suggested they'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. What I didn't expect was discovering the real reason behind their sudden concern, and it had nothing to do with Emma's welfare at all. Richard was home when we arrived, which was unusual. He was standing in the kitchen, still in his suit, pouring whiskey at 5 in the afternoon, which was even more unusual. I sent Emma to her room and confronted him with everything. The photos, the custody threats, my mother's bizarre ambush. I expected him to be outraged, to call our lawyer immediately, to defend me. Instead, he looked tired, defeated. Norma, maybe we should consider what they're saying. The room tilted. Excuse me? You've been distracted, distant. The MBA program has consumed you. I barely see you, and when I do, you're stressed about assignments or group projects. Emma mentioned you forgot her school play last month. I had forgotten her school play. I'd been in the library finishing a case study, and by the time I remembered, it was over. Emma had cried. I'd apologized 100 times, promised to make it up to her. That was one mistake, Richard. One. You miss things all the time. I'm working to provide for this family. And I'm working to be more than just arm candy at your corporate dinners. The words came out sharper than I intended. Is that what this is about? You want me to quit? To go back to being the perfect housewife? He set down his glass. I want you to be Emma's mother. That should have been my first clue that something else was happening, because Richard had never cared about my schedule before. He'd encouraged the MBA program, initially, helped me pick classes. So why the sudden change? But the real bombshell was still coming, and it would make everything else look like child's play. Over the next week, my mother's campaign intensified. She showed up at Emma's school during pickup, claiming she'd arranged to take Emma to dentist appointments I'd supposedly forgotten. She called Richard daily, expressing her concerns about my mental state, my priorities. Diane sent emails to our family lawyer, who'd apparently been their family lawyer first, outlining their case for emergency custody. I felt like I was being slowly erased from my own daughter's life. Emma started acting strange, too. She'd ask questions like, Mom, are you sad? Or, did I do something wrong? Because she could feel the tension even if she didn't understand it. I tried to keep things normal, but normal was slipping through my fingers like water. Then Richard came home one night and said we needed to talk. Really talk. He poured us both wine, sat me down at the dining table, the one we'd custom made from reclaimed wood, and said, Your mother called me today. She wants to take Emma to their vacation house in Cashiers for a few weeks. Give us time to sort things out. Absolutely not. Norma, listen to me. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it because I was desperate for any sign that we were still on the same team. Maybe it would be good. Emma could use a break from the tension here. We could use time to figure out what we're doing. What we're doing? Richard, we're being manipulated. Can't you see that? He pulled his hand back. Or maybe they have a point. Maybe we've been so focused on ourselves that we've forgotten what matters. I stared at my husband, the man I loved for 12 years, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. When did you stop being on my side? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. The next day, I did something I should have done from the beginning. I hired my own investigator. Not the family lawyer who clearly had divided loyalties, but a private investigator recommended by a friend from my MBA program. I gave him everything: the photos, the timeline, my mother's sudden interest in Emma's welfare. Something wasn't adding up, and I needed to know what. What he found would expose a betrayal so calculated, so cruel, that it would take me weeks to fully comprehend the depths of it. 3 days later, the investigator called. His voice was grim. "Mrs. Holloway, I need you to come to my office. There are things you need to see, and I don't want to discuss them over the phone." I met him in a bland office building in Chambly, far from the polished towers of Buckhead where everyone knew everyone. He had files spread across his desk: bank statements, property records, phone logs. "Your mother has been planning this for 6 months, specifically July. July, when I'd started my MBA program, when I'd told my family I was going back to school despite my mother's disapproval. She hired the photographer who took those pictures of you. The photos are real, but they're strategically timed to look suspicious when they're not. The man you were having lunch with, that's Professor Hartley from your program. The office building, that's where your study group meets. The Ritz-Carlton, you were meeting with a recruiter about post-graduation opportunities. I verified all of it." My hands were shaking. She fabricated evidence to make me look like a bad mother. Not just fabricated, orchestrated. She's been in contact with Emma's school, planting seeds about your emotional availability. The counselor who reported Emma's anxiety, your mother sits on the school's board of trustees. She pressured them to document issues. I felt sick. But why? Why would she do this? The investigator's expression turned sympathetic. "Mrs. Holloway, I need to show you something else. It's about your husband's company, the merger talks he's been having." He pulled out financial documents I didn't understand at first: corporate filings, investment portfolios, trust documents. Then he pointed to a name that appeared repeatedly: Diane Foster, my sister. "Your sister has been Richard's silent partner in his real estate development firm for 3 years. She's invested millions. But the merger he's been working on, it's failing. The company is underwater. Without a significant cash infusion, they'll both lose everything." The room spun. What does this have to do with Emma? "Your daughter is the beneficiary of a trust fund your father established before he died. $10 million, accessible when she turns 18. But there's a clause. If she's deemed to be in an unstable home environment, the trustees can petition to access the funds early for her care and welfare. Your mother is one of those trustees. So is your sister." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They're trying to steal Emma's inheritance and use your supposed unfitness as a mother as justification. With Richard's support, they could petition the court, gain custody, and access those funds within months. It would save your sister's investment and your husband's company. I sat back, my mind reeling. My own family, my own husband, conspiring to take my daughter and her money, using my ambition, my desire to be more than just a wife, as a weapon against me. But the investigator wasn't finished. "There's something else. Richard has been having an affair." Of course he had, because apparently my entire life was a lie. "With whom?" The investigator hesitated. "Your sister's personal assistant, a woman named Sophie Chen. It's been going on for 8 months." I drove home in a daze, anger and grief warring in my chest. Everything I'd built, my marriage, my family relationships, my sense of self, had been a facade. They'd played me perfectly, making me doubt myself, making me think I was the problem. And they'd almost succeeded. I picked up Emma from school that day myself, ignoring my mother's text asking if she should do pickup. Emma chattered about her day, oblivious to the storm building around her. I made her favorite dinner, pasta with butter and Parmesan, nothing fancy, and we ate together at the kitchen island, just the two of us. She asked if Grandma was mad at me. I told her adults sometimes disagree, but everything would be okay. I was lying. I didn't know if everything would be okay, but I knew I had to fight. That night, after Emma was asleep, I laid out my evidence on the home office desk: photos, bank statements, phone records, the investigator's report. I made copies of everything, stored them in 3 different locations. I called a friend from my MBA program who was a litigation attorney and asked for a referral to the best family lawyer in Atlanta. Not the family's lawyer, mine. Then I did something I should have done weeks ago. I checked Emma's iPad, the one my mother had given her. Hidden in the settings was monitoring software. My mother had been tracking my daughter's messages, her location, her conversations, building a file, creating a narrative. The rage that filled me then was cold and focused. They wanted a fight, they were going to get one. Richard came home past midnight, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. He found me still in the office, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal. For a moment, he looked panicked. Then he switched to defensive. "Norma, whatever you think you know." "I know everything," I said quietly. "The affair, the failing company, the trust fund, all of it." He sank into the chair across from me, the fight draining out of him. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. Your sister just needed a bridge loan. Your mother convinced me it was for Emma's good, that you were falling apart, that the money would secure her future. While funding your mistress and saving your business? How noble." "Sophie it's not like that." "I don't care what it's like, Richard. You conspired to take my daughter from me, to steal her inheritance, to destroy my reputation, for money." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Shame. "What are you going to do?" I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "I'm going to destroy all of you." But here's what I didn't know yet, what none of us knew, and it would change the entire game. Emma had heard everything, and she'd been recording. The next morning, Emma sat at the breakfast table pushing her cereal around her bowl, and I knew something was wrong. She had that look she gets when she's holding on to a secret that's too big for her 9-year-old shoulders. I poured her orange juice and sat down beside her, keeping my voice gentle. "Baby, what's going on in that head of yours?" She looked up at me with those wide blue eyes, Richard's eyes, unfortunately, and said, "Mom, I know what they're trying to do. I heard you and Dad last night." My heart stopped. "Emma, you shouldn't have—" "I recorded it," she interrupted, pulling out her phone, the one Richard insisted she have for safety. "I've been recording Grandma, too, and Aunt Diane. They say things when they think I'm not listening." She played me a clip, my mother's voice, clear as day. "The child will adjust. Children always do. And with that money properly invested, we can ensure she has the life she deserves, better than what Norma can provide, running around playing student at her age." Then Diane's voice. "Richard says Norma's becoming paranoid. That works in our favor. If she makes a scene, contests custody, it'll only prove she's unstable." My daughter had documented everything. School pickups where my mother coached her on what to say to the counselor, phone calls where Diane and Richard discussed timeline strategies, even a recording from the car where my mother told Emma that sometimes mommies need breaks from their children, that it wasn't her fault I was overwhelmed. I pulled Emma into my arms, this fierce, brilliant little girl who'd inherited my backbone and then some. "You are the bravest person I know," I whispered. "We're going to fix this, I promise." But fixing it meant doing something I'd never imagined. I had to beat them at their own game, and I had to do it without Emma knowing how dark things were about to get. My new attorney, Patricia Reeves, was everything the family lawyer wasn't: sharp, aggressive, and completely loyal to me alone. She listened to the recordings, reviewed my evidence, and smiled. "They really thought they could do this? Amateur hour. Here's what we're going to do." She filed for divorce that afternoon, citing adultery and financial malfeasance. She also filed a restraining order against my mother and sister, prohibiting contact with Emma without my consent. But the real move was the emergency motion to freeze the trust fund and launch an investigation into the trustees' conduct. "This is going to get ugly," Patricia warned. "They'll fight back hard." They did. Within hours, my mother's lawyer, some slick partner from a white shoe firm, filed their own motion, claiming I was having a breakdown, using the MBA program as evidence of maternal abandonment. They subpoenaed my professors, my classmates, even my therapist from 2 years ago when I dealt with postpartum anxiety after Emma was born. They were thorough, I'd give them that. But what they didn't expect was me going public. Patricia had connections at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I gave them an exclusive. Wealthy Atlanta family attempts to steal granddaughter's trust fund by fabricating custody case. The article ran with my name, my mother's name, and Richard's company prominently featured. Suddenly, their society friends were calling. The club was buzzing. Richard's business partners started asking questions. My mother called me, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you air our family's private matters to the press? Have you lost your mind?" "No, Mother, I've found it. See you in court." The preliminary custody hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which meant 2 weeks of psychological warfare. My mother tried to turn up at Emma's school again. The restraining order stopped her. Diane sent emails to Richard begging him to make Norma see reason, as if I was the unreasonable one. Richard himself moved into a hotel, claiming he needed space to think. Really, he needed space from the media attention that was tanking his business reputation. Sophie left him 3 days after the news broke. Apparently, being the other woman in a public scandal wasn't as exciting as sneaking around had been. Richard showed up at the house drunk one night, begging me to drop the charges, to work things out. I recorded that conversation too, his slurred confession about how Diane had convinced him the trust fund was the only way to save everything they'd built. Then things got even more complicated. My brother called. I hadn't mentioned Trevor yet because he'd been stationed overseas with the Air Force for the past year, blissfully unaware of the family drama unfolding back home. But he'd seen the news coverage, made some calls, and flew back on emergency leave. "Norma, what the hell is happening?" he demanded when he showed up at my door. "Mom says you've gone crazy, but this article makes it sound like she's trying to rob Emma." I told him everything, showed him everything, watched his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally disgust. "They roped me into this too," he said quietly. 2 months ago, Mom called me asking questions about whether I thought Emma was happy, whether I noticed you seemed stressed. I thought she was just being Mom. I didn't realize she was building a case. She wanted you on their side. Character witnesses for the hearing. Trevor's jaw tightened. "I'm testifying for you, whatever you need." And that was their first miscalculation, assuming my brother would blindly support family over truth. The custody hearing arrived like a storm nobody wanted, but everyone had prepared for. The courthouse in downtown Atlanta was intimidating, all marble and echoes, and I gripped Patricia's hand as we walked through the metal detectors. Emma wasn't required to be there, thank goodness. I'd left her with Trevor, who'd taken her to ice cream and promised her that Mommy was handling grown-up stuff. My mother arrived in full armor. Designer suit, perfect hair, the kind of composed expression she wore when hosting charity events. Diane was beside her, equally polished. Richard sat on their side of the courtroom, looking miserable. Their lawyers stood and painted me as an unstable woman who'd abandoned her maternal responsibilities for selfish academic pursuits, who'd become paranoid and vindictive, who'd dragged the family name through the media out of spite. Then Patricia stood up and destroyed them, piece by piece. She played Emma's recordings. The judge's face hardened as she listened to my mother coaching Emma on what to say to the counselor, to Diane discussing the trust fund with Richard. She presented the investigator's findings, the fabricated evidence, the monitoring software, the affair. She called the professor from my MBA program who testified I was a dedicated student who never missed a commitment to my daughter, who brought Emma to campus events, who balanced motherhood and education with grace. Then Patricia called Trevor. My brother took the stand in his uniform and stated clearly that our mother had attempted to manipulate him into supporting false allegations, that he'd witnessed her obsession with controlling family members, particularly women who stepped outside traditional roles, that our father had established Emma's trust fund specifically to ensure she'd have independence, and that Mother had resented that independence from the start. The courtroom was silent when he finished. But the moment that changed everything came when Patricia requested the judge review Emma's social media activity, specifically a private journal app Emma had been using. With my permission, she'd accessed it and found entries dating back months. Emma describing feeling confused when Grandma asked strange questions about Mommy, Emma writing about how Daddy seemed sad all the time, Emma noting that Aunt Diane visited a lot lately and always talked about money. And one entry from 3 weeks ago, I think the grown-ups are fighting about me. I wish they'd just ask me what I want. I want to stay with Mom. Mom makes me feel safe. The judge looked at my mother, at Diane, at Richard. Her voice was cold when she spoke. I'm denying the custody petition. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full audit of the trust fund and an investigation into whether criminal charges should be filed for fraud and conspiracy. Mrs. Holloway retains full custody of Emma. The restraining order remains in effect. My mother stood up, her composure finally cracking. Your Honor, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. The judge cut her off. You attempted to manipulate the legal system to gain access to your granddaughter's inheritance by fabricating a case against her mother. You involved multiple parties in this conspiracy. You traumatized a 9-year-old child. I understand completely. We walked out of that courthouse into Atlanta's sunshine, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Patricia hugged me. It's not over yet. The audit will take months, the divorce will be complicated, but the important part, Emma's safe. You won. But winning in court wasn't the same as winning in life, and the real reckoning was still coming. The audit revealed what we'd suspected. Diane and my mother had already begun liquidating some of Emma's trust investments, claiming they were rebalancing the portfolio, but actually using the funds to prop up Richard's failing company. They'd moved nearly $2 million. The district attorney filed charges for theft and fraud. My mother, who'd spent her entire life cultivating a reputation as Atlanta's society matriarch, was facing prison time. Richard filed for bankruptcy protection. His company collapsed. His partners sued him. The man who'd seemed so powerful, so successful, was revealed to have been running on debt and desperation for years. The divorce was finalized in 6 months. I got the house, full custody, and enough alimony to ensure Emma and I would be comfortable while I finished my MBA. Diane lost her license to practice law. The state bar doesn't look kindly on attorneys who participate in fraud against their own family members. Last I heard, she'd moved to Charleston, working in real estate, keeping a low profile. My mother refused to speak to me. The criminal trial was brutal. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a concerned grandmother who'd made poor judgment calls. The jury didn't buy it. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, though she'd likely serve less with good behavior. I took Emma to visit her once because Emma asked to. My mother looked smaller somehow, diminished. She told Emma she was sorry, that she'd made mistakes. Emma nodded but didn't hug her goodbye. As for Sophie, she disappeared from the narrative entirely, which was probably the smartest thing she did. I finished my MBA that spring, graduating with honors. Emma sat in the front row during the ceremony, waving a sign she'd made that said, "My mom is the smartest," with glitter and stickers. Trevor was there too, having transferred to a base in Georgia to be closer to us. He'd become the uncle Emma needed, the family member who showed up consistently and without agenda. The part nobody expected was Emma's request 6 months after everything settled. She asked if she could write about what happened for a school project on courage. I want other kids to know it's okay to speak up when adults are doing bad things, she told me, even when those adults are family. I helped her write it, keeping it age-appropriate but honest. She presented it to her 4th grade class. Her teacher called me afterward, voice thick with emotion. That was one of the bravest things I've seen a child do. Emma helped several students talk about problems in their own homes. That's when I realized Emma hadn't just survived this, she'd grown through it. She was stronger, more aware, more compassionate, because she'd seen firsthand how people could fail each other and how important it was to stand up anyway. I started my new job that fall, director of operations for a nonprofit that helped women in crisis, domestic violence survivors, women escaping poverty, women rebuilding their lives after trauma. I'd found my purpose through my own crisis, and I poured everything into it. Emma volunteered there sometimes, organizing donation drives at her school, proving that even kids could make a difference. Richard wrote me a letter a year after the divorce. He was working construction in Tennessee, rebuilding his life from scratch. He asked if he could see Emma again, if I'd consider joint custody. I thought about it for a long time. Patricia advised against it. Trevor said it was my call. Emma said she'd be okay with supervised visits if I thought it was right. We started slowly. One Saturday a month, lunch at a restaurant, Trevor present as the supervisor. Richard was different, humbler, quieter, genuinely remorseful. He told Emma he'd made terrible choices, that he'd let money and fear control him, that he was working every day to become someone she could be proud of. Emma listened, asked questions, slowly started to trust him again. I don't know if he'll ever be fully back in her life. Maybe he will. Maybe forgiveness is possible even after betrayal this deep. But that's Emma's choice to make as she gets older, and I'll support whatever she decides. The lawsuit against my mother's estate recovered most of Emma's money. The trust was restructured with independent trustees, people with no family connection and no financial interest in the outcome. Emma's future was secure again, protected this time by legal barriers my father should have included from the start. 2 years after the custody battle, I sat in my office at the nonprofit when Emma called from school. Mom, I need to interview someone who's overcome adversity for my history project. Can I interview you? I laughed, surprised. Me? Baby, I just did what any mother would do. No, Emma said firmly. You did what a strong woman does. You fought back when everyone tried to make you small. You protected me. You didn't give up even when your own family turned on you. That's what I want to write about. I had to wipe my eyes before I could answer. Okay, yes, we can do that. That night, Emma sat at our kitchen table with a notebook and asked me questions about the hardest year of our lives. What scared me most, what kept me going, how I knew I was doing the right thing. I answered honestly, not shying away from the hard parts, not pretending it had been easy, or that I hadn't doubted myself constantly. Did you ever want to give up? She asked. Every day, I admitted. But then I'd look at you, and I'd remember what I was fighting for. Not money, not pride. You, your safety, your future, your right to grow up knowing your mom fought for you when it mattered most. Emma wrote furiously, her pencil scratching across the page. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. I'm glad you're my mom. I'm glad you're my daughter, my brave, brilliant, amazing daughter. She finished the project the following week, titled it, When Family Isn't Family, How My Mom Saved Us, got an A+ and read it aloud to her entire grade during an assembly on resilience. I sat in the back of the auditorium, crying quietly while other parents looked at me with new understanding. The mom who'd been whispered about in carpool lines, speculated about in PTA meetings, was revealed to be something else entirely, a survivor. Life moved forward the way it does. Emma started middle school, I got promoted to executive director. Trevor met someone, got engaged. We built a new version of family, smaller but infinitely stronger, based on choice and trust rather than obligation and blood. My mother was released from prison after 11 months. She sent a letter asking if we could meet. I didn't respond immediately. Some wounds need time. Some forgiveness has to be earned, not granted automatically because someone shares your DNA. Maybe someday we'll talk. Maybe we won't. Either way, I've made peace with it. The final piece of closure came on Emma's 13th birthday. We were celebrating with Trevor and his fiancée, eating cake in her backyard, when Emma pulled me aside. Mom, I want you to know something. Everything that happened when I was 9, I used to think it was scary and awful, and it was, but it also taught me something important. What's that, baby? That being strong doesn't mean never being afraid. It means being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. You showed me that. You saved us by not backing down, even when everyone said you should." I hugged her tight, this teenager who was becoming an incredible young woman. "You saved us too, Emma. You were brave enough to document what was happening, smart enough to know something was wrong, strong enough to stand by me even when other adults were saying I was the problem." She smiled, that brilliant smile that lit up rooms. "We saved each other. That's what family does, right? Real family." "Real family," I agreed. And standing there in my backyard, with my daughter in my arms and my brother laughing with his fiancée, I understood something I hadn't before. The family you build is sometimes stronger than the family you're born into. The people who show up when everything's falling apart matter more than the people who share your last name. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child isn't money or status or a picture-perfect life. It's the courage to fight for what's right, even when it costs you everything. Especially when it costs you everything, because that's when your daughter learns that she's worth fighting for, that her mother will move mountains to protect her, that love isn't passive, it's active, fierce, and willing to go to war when necessary. Emma turned back to her party, rejoining her friends and the celebration. I stayed there for a moment, looking at the life we'd rebuilt from ashes. It wasn't the life I'd planned. It wasn't the wealthy, picture-perfect existence I'd thought I wanted, but it was real. It was ours, and it was built on a foundation that no one could shake. Not my mother, not my sister, not my ex-husband, not anyone. We'd been tested, we'd survived, and we'd come out stronger on the other side. That's the thing about being pushed to your absolute limit. You discover what you're actually made of. You learn that you're capable of more than you ever imagined. You realize that the comfortable life you were living might have been a cage, and breaking free, though terrifying, was the only way to truly live. Emma's trust fund sits safely in an account she can't touch until she's 25. By then, she'll have the wisdom to use it well. For now, we live on my salary and Richard's modest child support payments. We're careful with money, but we're happy. Emma volunteers at the nonprofit with me on weekends. She's talking about becoming a lawyer someday, fighting for people who can't fight for themselves. I think she'll be extraordinary.